On today's episode of Twisted News, we're going to tackle two cases that involve families. Now, the first one is about a clan from Minnesota who met their untimely demise from a disturbed relative struggling with mental illness. And the second story covers an update on one of the most heavily reported missing persons cases in modern history. One that's always stood out to me as particularly tragic, and that is the case of Madeleine McCann. I'm Andrew Fitzgerald, and welcome to another episode of Twisted News. Thanks for tuning in. If you guys enjoy our content, please remember to subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Number 1. Social media family murder confession. In this day and age, most people share just about everything on social media. From the most mundane things, such as meals and clothing, to the more imaginative content like travel and art-related posts, and sometimes even the most intimate ones. Sharing details online has become sort of ingrained in the routine of many people. What will forever remain as probably the most disturbing things being shared online are those that are related to crimes, and this is exactly what our story is about, which is not only shocking, but also disheartening. On Wednesday morning of April 20th, 2022, Hermantown Police in Minnesota received a request for a welfare check on a 29-year-old man who seemed to be experiencing a mental health crisis. His name was Brandon Cole Skogstad, and after arriving at Timber Lane Drive, the authorities failed to locate or contact Brandon. And then at around noon, and after reaching out to other people who may know him, they were informed by a relative that Brandon sent an alarming message to them, which was later posted publicly by Brandon himself on his own Facebook page. It perfectly described the mental health struggle he was experiencing at the time, and it seemed that he felt helpless and guilty, and that it was simply time to go. He wrote, "I've made the absolute horrid choice in taking my life." He also wrote, "I never sought out help because I felt I never deserved it." In that same post, he also admitted to taking the lives of 4 other people: his uncle, aunt, and his 2 cousins, whom the latter 2 he described as sweet and beyond angelic. An unidentified relative also provided the address of the family that Brandon mentioned in his message. It was located in the neighborhood of East Hillside. Hermantown Police immediately contacted the Duluth Police to inform them of their situation. When police arrived at the location, a single gunshot was heard from the property. To avoid unknown dangers, authorities decided to retreat temporarily to request backup before entering the property, and at around 3 p.m, it was scouted with drones headed by the SWAT team. What they saw was what the police chief would later describe as the worst crime scene that he'd ever seen in 3 decades on the workforce. 5 dead human bodies and a dog were found inside the home. According to neighbors, the house was occupied by a family of 4, married couple, Sean and Rihanna Berry, who were 47 and 44 respectively, and their daughters, 12-year-old Shiwei and 9-year-old Sade. The 5th dead body belonged to the nephew of the couple, Brandon, the one who wrote the alarming Facebook post earlier that day. A 9mm handgun was also found near his body. Based on the investigation, the killing spree seemed to have happened sometime on the evening of Tuesday, April 19th. Brandon, who was having a mental health crisis, appeared to have shot his relatives while they were sleeping, including the 2 children. It was not exactly clear what must have caused or triggered Brandon to do this, which led to the tragedy, except for his untreated mental illness. Despite not receiving help, it appeared that Brandon himself and his relatives were aware of his struggles. However, Brandon chose not to get the help that he badly needed, and sadly, it was way too late now for Brandon and his relatives. They could never bring back the lives lost because of this struggle. While initial investigations identified this as a murder-suicide case, at the time of this writing, the case remains active and under investigation. There is safety in the anonymity offered by social media. Most of us feel safe talking about ourselves, our feelings, and even our innermost thoughts. Brandon, who was believed to have originally written his messages as a letter to his relative, most likely decided to make it a public post in an attempt to explain or describe his struggles, which he didn't understand, and the result was this harrowing tragedy. Number 2, Madeleine McCann update. Cold cases that involve missing people are always difficult to talk about. There's always the fear that something might jeopardize the search, such as discussing it or releasing key information or evidence to the public. And yet, there's also the fear that the case might end up forgotten if people don't talk about it enough. However, the worst of all are the fear and longing that the family of the missing must have been continuously experiencing the entire time. There is no closure to their struggles, and their questions remain unanswered. This is probably what the family and relatives of Madeleine McCann had to and have continuously been going through. In 2007, Madeleine, then just 3 years old, from Rothley, England, went missing when their family went to Portugal on a vacation. They were staying at an apartment block at the Ocean Club, located in Praia da Luz. In the evening, her parents, Kate and Jerry, went out to have dinner with friends just 100 yards away from the apartment. Madeleine was left behind with her younger twin siblings, who were 2 years old. During the dinner, the adults took turns in checking in on the children at the complex. When Kate checked on them, Madeleine was suddenly nowhere to be found. It was believed that she had been abducted from the apartment complex and remained in Portugal alive during the search. The police even released a description of a man who seemed to be carrying a child the night Madeleine disappeared. However, nothing actually came of it. Over the years, a lot of speculations have been made. Probably the most unforgettable one was when Jerry and Kate were named as suspects in the case themselves. Almost a year later, the investigators withdrew their suspicions about the couple. But then, fast forward 15 years later, and the case of the missing toddler still remained unsolved. However, new information was released recently on April 22, 2022, with the investigators declaring an official suspect in the case. The Portuguese authorities haven't formally released his name to the public, but he was identified as a German national. It was also revealed that a 45-year-old German national has been under investigation by the German authorities since 2020 in the case. This man was a child sex offender and a convicted rapist. He was identified as Christian Breckner. During the time of Madeleine's disappearance, he was living in the Algarve region, where the village of Praia da Luz is. Prosecutors from Faro, Portugal requested the German authorities to inform Bruckner that he was being investigated for Madeleine and the disappearance. Bruckner, in defense, denied that he had anything to do with the case, though until now no charges have been made against him. For most people, especially Madeleine's family, this may seem like promising news. However, it's shrouded by the fact that some believe this move was just a result of the nearing deadline of this case's statute of limitations. Per Portuguese law, crimes punishable with prison sentences of at least 10 years have a statute of limitations up to 15 years. If the prosecution wasn't able to name a suspect when the deadline came, then no charges could then be filed. Authorities, on the other hand, remained focused on finding more possible links and evidence between Bruckner and Madeleine's case. Aside from his criminal history, phone evidence could also be used to prove that the suspect was in the area when the disappearance happened. In addition to that, they're also looking into Bruckner's camper van. He used that vehicle to travel between Portugal and Germany. Bruckner is the first formal suspect the Portuguese authorities have identified since putting the blame of Madeleine's disappearance on the parents. The suspect is currently serving a prison sentence in Germany for 7 years. He was convicted in 2019 of raping a 72-year-old American woman in Algarve in 2005. It's hard to imagine the type of hardships the McCann family must have gone through these past 15 years. What makes it more difficult is the fact that Madeleine must have also suffered since she was taken away from her family when they were supposed to be having an adventure together. And no one can say until now just how long she must have suffered, or if she is still suffering to this day. For even more crazy content from us, remember to check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/scarymysteries. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.